Victoria Hayes pressed her fingers against her temples as she stared at the computer screen in her small cubicle at Pinnacle Media Group. The Boston skyline stretched beyond the glass walls of the downtown office building, but she barely noticed the view anymore. 6 months into her role as a marketing coordinator, and every day felt like climbing a mountain with no summit in sight. Her manager, Patricia Monroe, had a talent for making Victoria feel small. Today was no exception. Patricia stood behind Victoria's chair, arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her designer blazer. "The campaign proposal you submitted is completely off-brand," Patricia said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I expected better from someone who claims to have fresh ideas." "Redo it by tomorrow morning." Victoria felt her stomach drop. She had spent 3 weeks on that proposal, researching trends, analyzing competitor strategies, crafting what she believed was a brilliant approach. But Patricia never seemed satisfied with anything she produced. Across the office, Natasha Greene looked up from her desk with a satisfied smirk. Natasha had joined the company 2 years before Victoria and treated every new hire as a potential threat. She thrived on watching others stumble, stick to simpler projects. "Victoria," Natasha called out sweetly, "not everyone is cut out for major campaigns." Victoria bit the inside of her cheek and turned back to her screen. She had graduated with honors from a top marketing program, won awards for her creative work, and landed this job through sheer determination. But none of that seemed to matter here. When plans fall apart by 7 in the evening, the office had emptied. Victoria packed her laptop bag, her mind already dreading the hours of work ahead. She pulled out her phone as she walked toward the subway station and felt her heart sink. An email from her apartment building management glowed on the screen. Due to an unexpected system failure, all electronic door locks in the building would be non-functional for the next 48 hours. Residents were advised to make alternative arrangements. Victoria stopped walking. Alternative arrangements. She lived alone in a studio apartment in Back Bay, one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Boston. Her entire paycheck went toward rent, student loans, and basic necessities. A hotel was financially impossible. Her best friend Lucas was out of town visiting family. She scrolled through her contacts, feeling increasingly desperate. Her college friends had all moved to different cities. Her family lived 3 states away. The idea of sleeping in her building's lobby felt humiliating, especially after the day she had endured. Then she remembered him. The neighbor in 8. Victoria had seen her neighbor from apartment 8 be exactly 4 times in the 6 months she had lived in the building. Each time, he had been wearing an expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase, and moving with the kind of purpose that suggested important places to be. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to notice everything once. When she had been struggling with grocery bags, he had held the elevator door for her without saying a word. His expression had been unreadable, but not unkind. She had mumbled a thank you, and he had nodded before returning his attention to his phone. Now, standing outside her locked apartment building, Victoria considered her options. She could swallow her pride and knock on a stranger's door, or she could spend 2 nights trying to sleep sitting upright in the lobby. Neither option was appealing, but one was slightly less terrible than the other. She took the elevator to the 8th floor, her heart pounding harder with each passing second. The hallway was quiet, lit by soft overhead lights that created long shadows. Apartment 8B had a dark wooden door, with a brass number plate that looked recently polished. Victoria raised her hand and knocked before she could change her mind, an unlikely agreement. Footsteps approached from inside, and then the door opened. Julian Sterling stood in the doorway, no longer in a suit, but wearing dark jeans and a gray sweater that somehow made him look even more intimidating. His hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it, and his expression shifted from neutral to mildly curious when he saw her. "Yes." His voice was deep and measured. Victoria cleared her throat. "Hi, I'm Victoria from 8A. We've seen each other in the elevator a few times. I know this is incredibly forward, but the building's locks are broken, and I cannot get into my apartment for the next 2 days. I was wondering if I could possibly stay here, just to sleep. I'll pay you, and I can cook or clean or whatever you need." Julian leaned against the doorframe, studying her with those sharp eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Victoria felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "You want to stay with a complete stranger?" he said finally. "That seems risky. I'm out of options," Victoria admitted. "I promise I'm not dangerous. I work in marketing. I pay my taxes, and I've never committed a crime. I just need a couch to sleep on." Something flickered in his expression, almost like amusement. He stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "One condition," he said. "You cook dinner? I've been eating takeout for a week, and I'm tired of it." Victoria felt relief wash over her. "Deal. Thank you so much." She stepped into the apartment and immediately felt underdressed for the space. Everything was sleek and modern, from the leather furniture to the abstract art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city lights, beginning to twinkle in the evening darkness. Julian closed the door behind her and pointed toward the kitchen. "There's food in the refrigerator. Try not to burn the place down." Kitchen disasters and unexpected conversations. Victoria had never claimed to be a great cook. She could make basic meals, enough to keep herself fed, but nothing impressive. As she opened Julian's refrigerator and found it stocked with fresh vegetables, quality meats, and gourmet ingredients, she felt a wave of panic. She decided on pasta with vegetables, something simple that even she could not mess up too badly. Julian disappeared into another room, giving her space to work. She found a pot, filled it with water, and set it on the stove to boil. Everything was going smoothly until she started chopping onions. Her eyes watered, and she reached up to wipe them with the back of her hand, forgetting she was still holding the knife. The blade slipped, and she let out a sharp gasp as it nicked her finger. "Everything okay in there?" Julian's voice came from the other room. "Fine." Victoria called back, wincing as she ran her finger under cold water. Blood swirled down the drain. She quickly grabbed a paper towel to apply pressure. Julian appeared in the doorway, took one look at her makeshift bandage, and crossed the room in 3 strides. He took her hand gently, examining the cut. "It's not deep," he said, his voice matter-of-fact, "but you should use an actual bandage." He opened a drawer and pulled out a first aid kit, wrapping her finger with practiced efficiency. Victoria watched his face as he worked, noticing the concentration in his expression and the unexpected gentleness of his touch. "Thank you," she said quietly. Julian met her eyes for a brief moment before releasing her hand. "Finish the pasta. I'll handle the chopping." They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Julian efficiently preparing the vegetables while Victoria managed the pasta. The water boiled over once, and she frantically turned down the heat while Julian watched with what might have been a suppressed smile. When they finally sat down to eat, the pasta was slightly overcooked, and the sauce was bland. But Julian ate without complaint. They sat at his dining table, the city spread out before them like a carpet of stars. "So," Julian said, twirling pasta on his fork, "you work in marketing. What company?" "Pinnacle Media Group," Victoria answered. "I'm a coordinator, which basically means I do all the work and get none of the credit." "Sounds frustrating," Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's one word for it. My manager seems to think my only purpose is to make her look good. Today she rejected a proposal I spent 3 weeks on without even really looking at it." Julian's expression darkened slightly. "Some people lead by building others up. Some people lead by tearing others down. Sounds like your manager is the second type. You seem to know a lot about leadership," Victoria observed. He shrugged. "I've seen enough bad managers to recognize the patterns." They continued talking as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily than Victoria expected. Julian asked thoughtful questions about her work, her background, and her goals. He listened in a way that few people did, with full attention and genuine interest. When Victoria asked about his work, however, his answers became vague. He mentioned consulting, business strategy, and long hours, but offered no specific details. She sensed he was being deliberately evasive, but she was too grateful for his hospitality to press the issue. Settling in after dinner, Julian showed her to the guest room. It was simple but elegant, with a comfortable-looking bed and another impressive view of the city. Victoria set down her bag, feeling the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. "Bathroom is across the hall," Julian said from the doorway. "Towels are in the cabinet. If you need anything else, let me know." "Thank you," Victoria said, meaning it. "Really? You've been incredibly kind." Julian nodded, but his expression remained unreadable. "Get some rest. You look like you need it." After he left, Victoria sank onto the bed and pulled out her phone. An email notification made her stomach clench. Patricia had sent her detailed notes on everything wrong with the rejected proposal. Along with a reminder that the revised version was due by 8 in the morning, Victoria wanted to cry, but she was too tired even for tears. Instead, she opened her laptop and began working, determined to prove herself no matter how impossible the task seemed. In the other room, she could hear Julian moving around, the soft sounds of someone who lived alone and was accustomed to solitude, as she typed away at her revisions. Victoria had no idea that the man giving her shelter was connected to her workplace in ways she could never imagine. She had no idea that this chance encounter would transform her life completely. All she knew was that, for the first time in months, someone had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and that small act of compassion was about to change everything. Victoria woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. She checked her phone, and her heart leaped into her throat. 7:30 in the morning. She had 30 minutes to get to the office with her revised proposal. She jumped out of bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and rushed to freshen up in the bathroom. When she emerged, the smell of coffee and toast filled the apartment. Julian was in the kitchen, dressed in another impeccable suit, this one charcoal gray with a burgundy tie. He looked like he had stepped out of a business magazine. "Coffee," he offered, holding up a mug. "I don't have time," Victoria said frantically, shoving her laptop into her bag. "I have to get to work. Thank you so much for everything, but I really need to run." Julian handed her the mug anyway, along with a piece of toast wrapped in a napkin. "Eat on the way. You won't function without fuel." Victoria paused, struck by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. "Thank you, really. I'll be back tonight if that's still okay. The locks won't be fixed until tomorrow." "It's fine," Julian said simply. "Go. Don't be late." Victoria hurried out, clutching the coffee and toast like lifelines. She made it to Pinnacle Media Group with 3 minutes to spare, her hair hastily pulled into a bun and her shirt wrinkled from sleeping in it. Natasha looked up from her desk as Victoria rushed past, her eyebrows rising in obvious judgment. "Rough night?" Natasha called out with false concern. Victoria ignored her and headed straight to Patricia's office. Her manager was already at her desk, perfectly put together as always. Examining her perfectly manicured nails with an expression of boredom. "You're cutting it close," Patricia said without looking up. "Do you have the revisions?" Victoria handed over a printed copy of her proposal, her hands trembling slightly from the rushed morning. Patricia flipped through it with exaggerated slowness, her lips pursed in a thin line. "This is better," she said finally, the words clearly painful for her to admit. "But it still needs work. I'll present it to the board next week. If they hate it, this reflects on both of us. Do you understand?" Victoria nodded, relief and frustration warring inside her. "I understand." Unexpected allies, the rest of the morning passed in a blur of emails and meetings. During lunch, Victoria sat in the break room with her sad desk salad when Robert Chen, the company's chief financial officer, walked in. Robert was in his late 40s, always friendly, and one of the few executives who actually remembered employees' names. "Victoria, right?" he said, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator. "How are things going in marketing?" "They're going," Victoria said diplomatically. Robert smiled knowingly. "Patricia can be tough. But between you and me, I've seen your work. That campaign proposal she's presenting next week has your fingerprints all over it. It's good. Really good." Victoria felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Chen. That means a lot. Call me Robert," he said. "Keep doing what you're doing. Talent always rises to the top eventually, even if it takes time." After he left, Victoria felt lighter than she had in weeks. Maybe she was not completely invisible here. Maybe someone actually saw her potential, Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas, her best friend who was still out of town. "Lucas, how's the apartment situation? Did you find somewhere to stay?" "Victoria, you won't believe this. I'm staying with my mysterious neighbor. The hot one in the expensive suits? Lucas? WHAT? Tell me everything immediately." Victoria smiled and typed out a quick summary of the past 24 hours, leaving out the part where she had accidentally walked in on Julian in the shower the night before. Some things were too embarrassing to share, even with her best friend. An evening of surprises that evening. Victoria returned to Julian's apartment with groceries. She was determined to cook a proper meal this time, something that would not involve injuries or near disasters. She had stopped at the market and picked up ingredients for chicken stir-fry, a dish she had made successfully before. Julian arrived home an hour later, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. He looked tired, with shadows under his eyes that had not been there that morning. "Long day?" Victoria asked from the kitchen. "You could say that," Julian replied, shrugging off his suit jacket. "What are you making?" "Stir-fry." "And before you ask, yes, I know how to make it without injuring myself." A hint of a smile crossed his face. "Good to know. I'll be in my office if you need anything." Victoria worked in the kitchen, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables somehow soothing after the stress of the day. She could hear Julian's voice through his office door, speaking on the phone in that same authoritative tone she had heard the night before. She caught snippets of conversation about quarterly reports and strategic initiatives, but nothing that gave her any real clue about what he actually did. The stir-fry turned out perfectly, golden and fragrant with ginger and garlic. She set the table and called out to Julian, who emerged from his office looking pleasantly surprised. "This actually looks edible," he said, sitting down across from her. "Your confidence in me is overwhelming," Victoria said dryly. But she was smiling. They ate together, falling into easy conversation again. Julian asked about her day, and Victoria found herself telling him about Robert Chin's encouraging words. "He sounds like one of the good ones," Julian said. "People like that are rare in corporate environments." "Do you deal with a lot of corporate politics in your consulting work?" Victoria asked, trying once again to get more information about his mysterious job. Julian paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "More than I would like. It's amazing how many people care more about appearance than results." "Tell me about it," Victoria said. "My manager, Patricia, is a master at taking credit for other people's work. I spent 3 weeks on a campaign proposal, and now she's presenting it to the board as if it was her idea." Something flickered across Julian's expression, too quick for Victoria to identify. That happens more often than it should, but the truth has a way of coming out eventually. The growing connection over the next few days, a comfortable routine developed. Victoria would go to work, endure Patricia's impossible demands and Natasha's passive-aggressive comments, then return to Julian's apartment in the evening. They would cook dinner together, Julian proving surprisingly helpful in the kitchen, despite his earlier claims of incompetence. They would talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from philosophy to their favorite movies to their worst childhood memories. Victoria learned that Julian had grown up in New York, that he had a younger sister he adored but rarely saw, and that he had a weakness for old detective novels. She learned that he drank his coffee black, that he ran every morning at 6, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard at the most unexpected moments. What she did not learn was what he actually did for a living. Whenever the conversation drifted too close to specifics about his work, Julian would deflect with practiced ease, steering the discussion in another direction so smoothly that Victoria barely noticed it was happening. On the third night, after the building locks had been fixed, and Victoria technically could have returned to her own apartment, she found herself hesitating. "I should probably go back to my place," she said, standing in Julian's living room with her bag packed. "You've been incredibly generous, but I don't want to overstay my welcome." Julian was sitting on the couch, a book open in his lap. He looked up at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You're not overstaying," he said simply. "But I understand if you want your own space back." Victoria felt a strange reluctance to leave. In just a few days, she had grown accustomed to coming home to someone, to having dinner with another person, to not feeling quite so alone in the city. Maybe I could stay one more night, she suggested. If that's okay? It's okay, Julian said, and Victoria thought she detected something like relief in his voice. Office drama escalates. The following week brought new challenges at Pinnacle Media Group. Patricia announced that the board meeting where she would present Victoria's campaign proposal had been moved up. It was now scheduled for Friday afternoon, giving them only 2 days to prepare a full presentation. I need comprehensive market research, competitor analysis, and projected ROI calculations, Patricia demanded, dropping a stack of folders on Victoria's desk. I also need you to design the presentation slides. Make them professional. I'll be presenting to the entire executive board, including the CEO. Victoria felt her stomach flip. The CEO of Pinnacle Media Group was notoriously reclusive. She had never seen him in person, only heard rumors about his high standards and his tendency to shut down ideas he found lacking. If Patricia's presentation failed, it would likely be blamed on Victoria's research. When do you need all this? Victoria asked, already knowing the answer would be unreasonable. Thursday evening. I want time to review everything before the Friday meeting. Victoria worked late into the night for the next 2 days, barely sleeping. Julian noticed her exhaustion and started leaving coffee and sandwiches in the guest room for her. Small gestures of kindness that kept her going when she felt like giving up. On Thursday evening, she delivered the completed presentation to Patricia, who barely glanced at it before dismissing her. Victoria returned to Julian's apartment feeling hollow and used. She's going to present all my work as her own, Victoria said, collapsing onto Julian's couch. And if the CEO hates it, she'll blame me. If he loves it, she'll take all the credit. Julian sat down beside her, closer than he usually did. Have you considered looking for another job? Every single day, Victoria admitted. But Pinnacle is one of the top media companies in Boston. If I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. I just need to survive long enough to prove myself. Julian was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. What if I told you that the people at the top might see more than you think? That your work might not go as unnoticed as you fear? Victoria looked at him curiously. That's a nice thought. But I've learned not to count on fairness in corporate America. Sometimes people surprise you, Julian said softly. The night before everything changed, Friday morning arrived too quickly. Victoria dressed carefully in her best professional outfit, a navy blue dress that made her feel more confident than she actually was. Julian was already in the kitchen when she emerged, and he handed her a travel mug of coffee. Good luck today, he said. I'll need it. As she headed for the door, Julian called out to her, Victoria. She turned back. Remember that your worth is not determined by whether one person acknowledges your contributions. You're talented and hardworking, and that matters regardless of what happens today. Victoria felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Julian, for everything. Not just the place to stay, but for being kind when I really needed it. Something intense flashed in his eyes, an emotion she could not identify. Anytime. At the office, nervous energy filled the air. The executive board meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Patricia was in rare form, snapping at everyone and micromanaging every detail. Victoria tried to stay out of her way, focusing on her regular work, while her stomach churned with anxiety at 1:30. Patricia called her into her office. I need you to attend the board meeting, Patricia said, and Victoria's heart stopped. What? Why? In case they have technical questions about the research. You'll sit in the back and only speak if directly asked. Do not volunteer any information. Do not try to make yourself the center of attention. Am I clear? Victoria nodded, her mouth dry. Crystal clear. The calm before the storm, the boardroom was on the top floor of the building, a space Victoria had never entered before. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Boston Harbor. A long mahogany table dominated the room. Surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent, Patricia took her place at the head of the table while Victoria slipped into a chair along the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Robert Chen arrived and gave her an encouraging smile. Other executives filed in, all looking powerful and important in their designer suits. Then the door opened one final time, and Victoria's entire world tilted on its axis. Julian Sterling walked into the room, but he was not dressed as casually like he did at home. He wore a three-piece suit that screamed authority, and every person in the room stood up as he entered. He moved to the head of the table with the easy confidence of someone who owned not just the room, but the entire building. Good afternoon. Everyone, Julian said, his voice carrying the same warmth Victoria had heard over dinner conversations, but with an added layer of command. Let's begin. Victoria felt like she could not breathe. Her neighbor, the man she had been staying with, the man she had cooked terrible omelets for, was the CEO of Pinnacle Media Group. Julian's eyes swept the room and landed on her. For one brief moment, his professional mask slipped, and she saw something that looked like apology in his expression. Then he turned to Patricia and said, "I understand you have a new campaign proposal to present. Please proceed." Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing. How long had he known? Had he been laughing at her this whole time, while she complained about her job, about the mysterious CEO, about everything? And more importantly, what was going to happen when Patricia presented Victoria's work as her own, right in front of the man who had heard Victoria talk about this exact situation just last night? This meeting was about to become very interesting. Victoria's hands gripped the edge of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She watched Julian take his seat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he opened a leather portfolio and clicked his pen with practiced precision. He looked every inch the powerful CEO, nothing like the man who had handed her coffee that morning or helped her chop vegetables in his kitchen. Patricia stood at the front of the room, her confidence radiating as she connected her laptop to the projection system. The first slide appeared on the screen, displaying the campaign proposal Victoria had poured her heart into for 3 weeks. "Good afternoon, everyone," Patricia began, her voice smooth and professional. "Today I'm excited to present a revolutionary marketing campaign that will position Pinnacle Media Group as the industry leader in digital transformation." Victoria felt sick. Every word coming out of Patricia's mouth was a lie. Every concept, every strategy, every carefully researched statistic belonged to Victoria. But Patricia presented it all as if she had spent countless hours developing these ideas herself. Julian leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled under his chin as he watched the presentation. His face gave nothing away, but Victoria knew him well enough now to recognize the slight tension in his jaw. He was not pleased. Robert Chen sat across the table, occasionally glancing at Victoria with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what was happening. The other executives took notes, nodded along, and asked occasional questions that Patricia deflected with vague corporate speak. "The market research indicates a significant opportunity in the 18 to 34 demographic," Patricia continued, clicking to a slide filled with data that Victoria had spent 2 sleepless nights compiling. "Our competitors have largely ignored this segment, which gives us a strategic advantage." One of the board members, a stern woman in her 50s, named Catherine Lawson, raised her hand. "This research is impressive. How long did it take you to gather all this data?" Patricia did not hesitate. "Several weeks of intensive analysis." "I believe in being thorough." Victoria's stomach churned. She wanted to stand up and scream the truth, but she remained frozen in her chair, watching her hard work being stolen right in front of her eyes. The trap is set. Julian had remained silent throughout most of the presentation, but now he leaned forward slightly. "Patricia, I have a question about the competitor analysis on slide 12. Patricia smiled confidently. "Of course, Mr. Sterling. You've identified 3 main competitors and outlined their marketing strategies in detail. Can you walk me through your methodology for gathering this intelligence? Specifically, how did you access their internal campaign data?" Patricia's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "Well, I used industry reports and publicly available information combined with strategic analysis." "Interesting," Julian said, his tone neutral. "Because some of this data matches information from proprietary databases that require specialized access credentials. Did you conduct this research personally?" Victoria's heart pounded. She had used her graduate school credentials to access those databases, something she had mentioned to Julian during one of their dinner conversations. He had remembered. Patricia shifted her weight. I oversee a team of talented researchers. The specific technical details of data collection were delegated appropriately. See, Julian said. And this creative concept on slide 18? The integrated social media campaign with the interactive storytelling component, that's quite innovative. Where did the inspiration come from? I've always believed in pushing creative boundaries, Patricia said, recovering some of her confidence. The idea came from observing current trends and anticipating where the market is heading. Julian nodded slowly, then turned his attention to the other people in the room. Before we continue, I'd like to ask Victoria Hayes to join us at the table. The room fell silent. Every head turned to look at Victoria, who felt her face flush hot. Patricia's expression transformed from confident to alarmed in the space of a heartbeat. Mr. Sterling, I don't think that's necessary, Patricia said quickly. Victoria is here for technical support if needed, but she was not involved in the strategic development of this campaign. Really? Julian's eyebrows rose slightly. That's odd, because I have reason to believe otherwise. Victoria, please join us. Victoria stood on shaking legs and walked to the table. Julian gestured to an empty chair beside Robert Chen, who gave her an encouraging nod as she sat down. She could feel Patricia's furious glare burning into the side of her head. The truth. Emerges. Julian opened his portfolio and pulled out several printed documents. Victoria recognized them immediately. They were early drafts of her campaign proposal, complete with her name in the header and timestamp showing when she had created them. I received these documents anonymously earlier this week, Julian said, though Victoria suspected there was nothing anonymous about it. He had probably accessed the company's shared drive himself. They appear to be preliminary versions of the campaign we just saw presented. Victoria, are these your work? Victoria's mouth was dry. She glanced at Patricia, whose face had gone pale, then looked back at Julian. His expression was encouraging, giving her the strength to speak. Yes, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Those are mine. I developed the entire campaign concept, conducted all the research, and created the presentation. I submitted it to Patricia 3 weeks ago. That's ridiculous, Patricia interjected, her voice rising. Victoria is a junior coordinator. She doesn't have the experience or the strategic thinking required for a campaign of this scope. She may have done some preliminary research, but I developed the actual strategy. Then you won't mind answering some detailed questions about the research methodology, Julian said calmly, starting with which specific databases you use to gather the competitor intelligence. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her face flushed red. I would need to check my notes. Victoria? Julian turned to her. I use the Marketing Intelligence Database and the Consumer Insights platform. It's both accessible through my alumni account at Boston University, Victoria said clearly. I also conducted primary research through social media, listing tools, and analyzed 3 years of competitor press releases and public filings. Catherine Lawson leaned forward, her sharp eyes moving between Patricia and Victoria. And the creative concept? The interactive storytelling campaign? Victoria took a deep breath. I was inspired by emerging trends in parasocial relationships and user-generated content. The idea is to create narrative threads that consumers can influence through their engagement, making them feel like active participants rather than passive audiences. It builds brand loyalty through emotional investment. That's exactly what the proposal outlined, Robert Chen said, looking directly at Patricia. In fact, Victoria, I believe you mentioned this concept to me briefly during a conversation in the break room last week. Patricia's professional mask was crumbling. This is absurd. She's a junior employee trying to take credit for work above her level. Mr. Sterling, I've been with this company for 8 years. My track record speaks for itself. Your track record, Julian said, his voice taking on an edge of steel, shows a pattern of taking credit for your team's ideas. I've been reviewing personnel files, and this is not the first time someone has complained about your management style. It's simply the first time someone has had the documentation to prove it. He looked around the table at the other executives. I want to be clear about something. At Pinnacle Media Group, we succeed because of talent and innovation, not because of who can claim credit the loudest. This campaign is brilliant. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking strategy we need. But I will not reward theft of intellectual property, and I will not tolerate managers who build their careers by standing on the backs of their employees. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Mr. Sterling, if I could just explain. You can explain to human resources. Julian interrupted. We'll be conducting a full review of projects you've overseen in the past 3 years. This meeting is adjourned. The aftermath of boardroom emptied quickly, executives filing out with whispered conversations and shocked expressions. Patricia left without looking at anyone, her shoulders rigid with fury and humiliation. Robert Chen paused beside Victoria's chair. Well done, he said quietly. I've been waiting for someone to stand up to her for years. The CEO noticed. That's good. After he left, only Victoria and Julian remained. She sat at the table, her hands trembling with adrenaline, unable to fully process what had just happened. Julian gathered his papers slowly, giving her time to collect herself. You knew, Victoria said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. This whole time you knew who I was and where I worked. Julian set down his portfolio and looked at her directly. Yes. When I was complaining about my job, about my boss, about the mysterious CEO who never showed his face, you just sat there and listened. Yes. Why? Victoria felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from anger or relief or confusion, she could not tell. Why didn't you tell me? Julian walked around the table and sat in the chair beside her. It's close enough that she could see the genuine emotion in his eyes. Because you needed someone who would just listen. Not your boss, not the CEO, just someone who saw you as Victoria. Someone you could be honest with, without fear of professional consequences. But you let me stay in your apartment? You were kind to me. Was that all just some elaborate test? No, Julian said firmly. When you knocked on my door that night, I had no idea who you were. I checked the building directory after you fell asleep and realized you worked at my company. I could have told you then, but you were already stressed about your job. I thought if you knew, it would change everything between us. You would not have been yourself anymore. Victoria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. So when did you decide to do all this? To expose Patricia? When you told me she was going to present your work as her own, I couldn't let that happen. So I accessed the shared drive, found your original files, and made sure the board would see the truth. Oh, Julian's expression softened. Victoria, you are incredibly talented. That campaign is exceptional. You deserved credit for it, and you deserve to be in that room presenting it yourself. But now everyone will think I only succeeded because the CEO has some kind of personal interest in me, Victoria said. The realization hitting her hard, they'll say I slept my way to the top, or that you were playing favorites. Let them think what they want, Julian said. The truth is in the work. Your research is impeccable, your strategy is sound, and your creative vision is exactly what this company needs. Anyone who actually looks at the campaign will see that. A new beginning. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. Finally, Victoria spoke. What happens now? Julian stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the Boston skyline. Now we implement your campaign. With you leading it, not as a junior coordinator, but as a senior strategist. You'll report directly to Robert Chen, and you'll have a team working under you. Victoria's eyes widened. You're promoting me? I'm putting you in a position that matches your abilities. Consider it a correction of a long overdue oversight. He turned back to face her. But there's something else we need to discuss. Victoria's heart skipped. What us? Julian said simply. The professional situation is resolved, but the personal situation is more complicated. I've enjoyed having you stay at my apartment. I've enjoyed our conversations and our dinners together. I've enjoyed getting to know you as a person, not as an employee. I've enjoyed it too, Victoria admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. But I'm your CEO now, officially and publicly. There are power dynamics to consider, ethical implications. If you want to keep things purely professional, I understand completely. Your career will not suffer either way. I promise you that. Victoria stood and walked over to where he stood by the windows. The city stretched out below them, full of possibility and potential. She thought about the past week, about the unexpected kindness Julian had shown her, about the way he had listened to her dreams and frustrations without judgment. She thought about how he had remembered every detail she had mentioned, how he had used that information to defend her when it mattered most. "What if I don't want to keep things purely professional?" she asked, looking up at him. Something blazed in Julian's eyes. "Then we do this the right way. Transparent, honest, with proper disclosure to human resources. No secrets, no favoritism. You earn every success through your own merit, and I make sure everyone knows it." "That sounds fair," Victoria said. Smiling for the first time since the meeting had started, Julian reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "There's one more thing you should know." "What?" "I've been looking for someone like you for years. Someone brilliant and creative and brave enough to stand up for what they believe in. When you knocked on my door that night, desperate and determined, I saw something special. And every day since then, you've proven me right." Victoria felt tears threatening again, but this time they were happy ones. "You're not quite what I expected in a mysterious CEO. You're not quite what I expected in a neighbor," Julian replied, his lips quirking into that slight smile she had grown to love. "But I'm glad fate put you outside my door." "Me too," Victoria whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. When their lips met, it felt like the culmination of everything that had been building between them over the past week. Sweet and tender and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This is going to be complicated, I know. People are going to talk. Let them. Your career is going to take off, and I'm going to make sure of it. But you'll have to work twice as hard as anyone else to prove it's not because of me."
Ow.
"I'm ready for that," Victoria said confidently. "I've been working twice as hard my whole life." 6 months later, Victoria stood in the same boardroom where her life had changed, but this time she was the one presenting. Her campaign had launched 3 months earlier and had exceeded every projected metric. Engagement was up 70%. Brand awareness had doubled. And Pinnacle Media Group had landed 3 major new clients who specifically cited the innovative marketing strategy as their reason for choosing the company. Patricia had been quietly let go after the HR investigation revealed a pattern of taking credit for her team's work spanning years. Natasha had transferred to a different department after Victoria's promotion made it clear that undermining colleagues would not be tolerated. Robert Chen had become Victoria's mentor, guiding her through the complexities of corporate leadership with patience and wisdom. And Julian sat at the head of the table, watching her present quarterly results with pride evident in his eyes. Though he was careful to maintain professional distance during business hours, the success of this campaign demonstrates the value of investing in emerging talent, Victoria concluded her presentation. When we create an environment where innovation is rewarded and employees feel empowered to contribute their best ideas, everyone wins. Catherine Lawson nodded approvingly. "Exceptional work, Victoria. I look forward to seeing what you develop next." After the meeting, Victoria packed up her materials and headed back to her new office. A space with actual walls and a door that closed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julian. "Julian, dinner tonight?" "My place. I'm cooking." "Victoria, your cooking has improved that much?" "Julian, I've been practicing. Plus, I have something important to ask you." "Victoria, mysterious. I like it. 7. Julian, perfect." Victoria smiled and tucked her phone away. Her best friend Lucas had visited last month and had declared Julian actually perfect, which is suspicious, but I'll allow it.
Yeah, her.
Parents had met him over video call and had been charmed despite their initial concerns about the age difference and power dynamic. Relationship was not always easy. They were careful to keep clear boundaries between work and personal life. Victoria insisted on earning every promotion and achievement through measurable results. Julian bent over backward to avoid any appearance of favoritism, sometimes to the point where he was harder on her than anyone else. But when they were alone in his apartment, cooking dinner together, or reading side by side on the couch, or talking late into the night about their dreams and fears, none of the complications mattered. They had found something real and rare, built on a foundation of respect and genuine connection. The future unfolds that evening. Victoria arrived at Julian's apartment with a bottle of wine and a bag of fresh vegetables from the farmer's market. She used her own key now, a small thing that felt monumental every time she turned it in the lock. Julian was already in the kitchen, actually cooking something that smelled delicious. He had indeed been practicing, taking online cooking classes during his limited free time because he knew how much Victoria enjoyed their shared meals. "Something smells amazing," Victoria said, setting down her bags and wrapping her arms around him from behind. "It's risotto," Julian said, stirring the pot carefully. "I've been working on getting the texture right. The chef in the video makes it look easy, but timing is everything." They cooked together in comfortable silence, moving around each other with the ease of people who had learned each other's rhythms. When the meal was ready, they sat at the table by the windows, the city lights twinkling below them like fallen stars. "You said you had something important to ask me," Victoria said. Taking a sip of wine, Julian set down his fork, suddenly looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. "I've been thinking about the future, about what I want and where I'm going." "Okay," Victoria said slowly, her heart beginning to race. "When you knocked on my door 6 months ago, I was successful by every conventional measure. I had money, power, respect, but I was also lonely. I had isolated myself, convinced that relationships were distractions from achievement." He reached across the table and took her hand. "You changed everything. You reminded me that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with." Victoria squeezed his hand, overwhelmed by the emotion in his voice. "I know it's only been 6 months," Julian continued. "I know people will say it's too soon. But I also know that I don't want to spend another day without being absolutely certain of our future together." He stood up and moved around the table, and Victoria's breath caught as he knelt beside her chair. "Victoria Hayes, you are brilliant, brave, creative, and kind. You challenge me to be better. You make every day brighter. Will you marry me?" He opened a small velvet box, revealing a ring that caught the light and scattered it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." Julian slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. The risotto grew cold on the table, forgotten in the joy of the moment. Epilogue 1 year later. Victoria stood in a beautiful garden overlooking Boston Harbor. Wearing a simple white dress that made her feel like herself, Julian waited at the altar, looking more relaxed and happy than anyone had ever seen the typically serious CEO. Lucas stood as her best friend, wiping away tears throughout the ceremony. Robert Chen attended with his wife, beaming with paternal pride. Even Catherine Lawson from the board showed up, grudgingly admitting that she had never seen Julian smile so much as Victoria walked down the aisle toward the man who had started as a mysterious neighbor and become her everything. She thought about the night her building's locks had broken, how she had knocked on a stranger's door, desperate and alone. With no idea that she was knocking on the door to her future, sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when everything seems to be falling apart. Sometimes a locked door leads you exactly where you are meant to be. And sometimes, the person who seems like a stranger turns out to be the one who sees you more clearly than anyone else ever has. Julian took her hand as she reached the altar, and they faced each other with matching smiles. "Ready for the next adventure?" he whispered. "With you?" Victoria whispered back. "Always." They kissed as husband and wife while their friends and family cheered, the Boston skyline sparkling behind them like a promise of all the beautiful tomorrows yet to come. The end.